A man who ignores you wants you to believe he's in control. He wants you to think his silence is strength, that his distance means he's unbothered, unaffected, untouched. But the truth is very different. Ignoring someone is rarely about power. It's about fear. It's about not knowing how to face what you make him feel. Because when a man truly knows who he is and what he wants, he doesn't disappear. He communicates. He stands firm. He shows up. Silence becomes a weapon only when words feel too dangerous to use. When a man ignores you, it looks like confidence on the surface, but most of the time it's nothing more than a shield. It's armor he puts on because he doesn't know how to deal with what's happening inside him. Real strength doesn't need hiding places. A strong man doesn't disappear when emotions get complicated. He doesn't go silent when feelings get real. He steps forward and handles it. Silence is not bravery. Silence is avoidance dressed up to look powerful. Ignoring someone is often the easiest escape when confrontation feels too uncomfortable. It's easier to pull away than to admit confusion. It's easier to go quiet than to say, I don't know what I want, or I'm not ready, or you matter more than I expected. That silence becomes a wall, not to keep you out, but to protect him from facing his own truth. Because once he speaks, he has to be honest, and honesty requires courage he may not have yet. A man who truly feels secure doesn't need to test people with distance. He doesn't need to measure his worth by how much someone chases him. When ignoring becomes a strategy, it reveals insecurity. It shows fear of losing control. Words can expose weakness, but silence feels safer because it keeps him from being seen. And being seen is scary when you're not fully comfortable with who you are. What many don't realize is that ignoring someone takes effort. It takes mental energy to hold back a message, to resist responding, to pretend not to care. That effort tells you everything. If there were no feelings involved, silence would come naturally. But when someone matters, silence becomes a conscious choice. A shield is raised because emotions are knocking too loudly on the door. This kind of silence also reveals emotional immaturity. Instead of communicating discomfort, he withdraws. Instead of expressing uncertainty, he creates distance. It's a learned behavior rooted in fear of vulnerability. Vulnerability requires risking rejection, and ignoring feels like a way to stay safe. But safety isn't strength, it's stagnation. The shield of silence might protect his ego in the moment, but it slowly weakens him. Problems don't disappear because you refuse to speak about them. Feelings don't vanish because you ignore them. They wait, they grow, and eventually they surface in regret, confusion, or loss. A man who hides behind silence often looks back and realizes he missed something meaningful because he was too busy protecting himself. When you understand this, you stop taking his silence personally. You see it for what it is. Not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of his internal struggle. Ignoring you isn't proof that he's strong. It's proof that he's still learning how to face himself. And the moment you stop reacting to the shield, it loses its power. Silence has a way of pretending to be confidence. But if you look closely, it usually tells a very different story. When a man ignores you, he wants you to believe he's unbothered, unshaken, perfectly fine without explanation. He wants his quiet to look like control. But real confidence doesn't need silence to survive. A confident man is comfortable speaking his truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Silence becomes loud only when insecurity is trying to hide. A man who is secure in himself doesn't fear communication. He doesn't fear questions, emotions, or expectations. He understands that clarity builds respect. When silence shows up instead, it's often because words feel too risky. Saying the wrong thing might expose confusion. Saying the right thing might require commitment. And saying anything at all might reveal that he cares more than he planned to. So silence becomes the safest option for someone who doesn't trust his own emotional footing. Insecurity shows itself when a man believes responding gives away power. He starts to think that distance makes him look strong, that ignoring you keeps him on top. But confidence doesn't play games. Confidence doesn't need strategies to feel important. Confidence is steady. It shows up the same way whether things are easy or complicated. Silence, on the other hand, fluctuates. It appears when emotions rise and disappears when control feels threatened. Ignoring someone is often about fear of exposure. Words have a way of revealing intention. Once you speak, you can't hide behind mystery anymore. Silence allows him to stay undefined. It allows him to avoid being judged for not knowing what he wants or not being ready to give what's expected. That uncertainty is uncomfortable. He masks it with quiet. But the quiet doesn't erase the uncertainty. It only postpones it. There's also an internal contradiction in silence. A man who truly doesn't care doesn't need to ignore. He simply moves on. Silence requires restraint, awareness, and emotional energy. That energy is spent because something inside him is reacting. He notices your absence. He wonders if you'll say something. He checks to see if you noticed his withdrawal. That awareness is not indifference. It's insecurity trying to stay hidden. Over time, this kind of silence starts to work against him. While he's busy trying to appear unaffected, the other person begins to see clearly. Patterns become obvious. Emotional limits reveal themselves. What once felt confusing starts to feel predictable, and predictability exposes weakness. The silence that was meant to protect his image ends up defining it. When you stop interpreting silence as confidence, you reclaim your clarity. You understand that strength doesn't disappear when emotions show up. Strength speaks. Strength listens. Strength stands in the discomfort instead of avoiding it. Silence may look calm, but most of the time it's just insecurity hoping no one notices. When a man ignores you, one of the clearest truths behind that silence is that he's avoiding accountability. Accountability requires ownership, and ownership requires maturity. It means standing in your actions and accepting how they affect someone else. Silence is the escape route for a man who isn't ready to do that. If he speaks, he has to answer questions. If he responds, he has to explain his behavior. If he shows up, he has to admit where he fell short. Ignoring you allows him to dodge all of that. Accountability forces a man to look at himself honestly. It forces him to admit whether he was consistent, whether he gave mixed signals, whether he promised more than he delivered. That level of self-reflection is uncomfortable for someone who hasn't done the inner work. So instead of saying, "I was wrong," or "I don't know how to give you what you deserve," he chooses silence. Silence becomes his way of saying nothing so he doesn't have to admit anything. Ignoring you also protects his ego. The ego hates being confronted with its flaws. When you ask for clarity or effort, it threatens the version of himself he wants to believe in. He wants to see himself as a good person, a decent man, someone with control. Accountability challenges that image. Silence lets him maintain the illusion without actually changing his behavior. As long as he doesn't respond, he doesn't have to face the truth. What's important to understand is that silence doesn't mean he doesn't know what he did. Most of the time, he knows exactly why you're confused, hurt, distant. He just doesn't want to acknowledge it, because acknowledgement means responsibility. Responsibility means growth, and growth means letting go of comfort. Ignoring you keeps him in familiar territory where he doesn't have to evolve. This avoidance also shows emotional immaturity. Mature men understand that accountability is not weakness, it's strength. It's the ability to say, "I messed up," or "I'm not ready," without feeling diminished. Immature men see accountability as a threat. They think admitting fault lowers their value. In reality, avoiding it does far more damage. Silence erodes trust. It creates confusion. It leaves questions unanswered, and unanswered questions turn into emotional distance that can't easily be repaired. When a man ignores you, he's also delaying consequences. He believes that by not responding, the situation will fade away, but unresolved issues don't disappear. They wait, they linger, and eventually they show up as regret. One day, he realizes that the person he avoided is no longer available for conversation, explanation, or closure. That's when accountability comes back, but this time, it's too late to act on it. Your power comes when you recognize this pattern. You stop chasing answers from someone who chose avoidance over honesty. You stop internalizing silence as rejection and start seeing it as information.